My name is Elias Warren. I'm 34 years old, a freelance illustrator who's lived most of his adult life in crowded cities, surrounded by a blur of neon lights and murmuring strangers. But I've always carried with me the imprint of a different place, a shadowed world of pine and snow and silence, pressed into my memory from childhood trips with my father. He used to take me hiking in the Cascade Range, back when my mother was still alive and our family was only beginning to fracture. Those mountains were where I felt most alive and most alone. After my father's death last winter, a slow disintegration from the inside out, cancer gnawing him hollow, I found myself haunted by the memory of those quiet trails. I needed distance from people, from grief, from the walls that seemed to hum with absence. So I packed up my sketchbooks, my old boots, and enough supplies for a month, and I drove north. I rented a cabin barely held together by rusted nails and stubborn timber, tucked deep in the forest where the mountains shouldered the sky. It was supposed to be a retreat. It became something else. The cabin smelled of pine resin and stale smoke, the kind of scent that clung to your hair and made you feel older. The walls groaned at night when the wind ran its fingers over the roof. It was the perfect place to unravel quietly, to let grief dissolve into silence. The forest here wasn't gentle. It pressed close around the clearing, ancient trees crowding in like eavesdroppers. Their trunks were immense, furred with moss, their roots swollen and twisted like the knuckles of something buried alive. In the mornings, mist lay low over the ground, soft and silver. At dusk, it rose in slow coils from the undergrowth like breath from hidden mouths. I spent the first few days walking, long, aimless rambles along deer trails that wove between firs and hemlocks. The snow was thin, brittle underfoot, the air sharp enough to sting my throat. I carried my sketchbook tucked beneath my arm, pausing sometimes to draw the black ribs of branches or the fractured angles of boulders iced over like glass. It was on the third day that I saw the tracks. They cut across the trail about a mile from the cabin, where the forest dipped into a hollow. At first, I thought they were from a bear. They were massive, each one the size of a dinner plate pressed deep into the crust of old snow. But they were wrong. Too long in the stride, too narrow at the heel. And they didn't veer or wander like animal prints. They ran in a clean, unwavering line, vanishing into the trees. Something about their symmetry disturbed me. I crouched over one, touched the edges. The snow had hardened, but there was still a faint dampness in the depression, as though whatever had passed through had done so only hours ago. I told myself it was just an oddly shaped bare track distorted by melting. Still, I couldn't shake the image from my mind as I walked back. That night the wind rose. It hissed around the eaves like something searching for a way in. The trees thrashed and moaned. I lay in bed listening to the cabin creak, my father's old hunting knife resting unsheathed on the nightstand, its blade dull but comforting. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks. The next morning was raw and silent, the forest flattened under a new fall of snow. The tracks were gone, swallowed. I kept walking. The silence felt heavier now, like a weight pressing between my shoulder blades. Birds were scarce here, and when they did appear, they flitted fast and silent as though eager to leave. Midway up a ridge, I found a tree that had been torn open. Its trunk had been split down the center, the wood peeled back like flesh. The edges were frayed, shredded, not cut. I stood there staring, my breath fogging, trying to imagine the force it would take to rip a living tree apart. No claw marks, no teeth marks, just raw destruction, fibers hanging like tendons. I sketched it, though my hand shook. A sound startled me as I packed my pencil away, a crack, sharp and brittle from deeper in the trees. I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the slow fall of snow from branches. But as I moved on, I kept glancing behind me. The days blurred. My routine became obsessive. Walk, sketch, return. I started noticing odd little signs, stones stacked into crooked towers near the riverbank, twigs threaded through one another like crude latticework. Once I found what looked like the ribcage of a deer, picked clean, laid out in a spiral on the ground. No tracks around it. Each time I told myself the same thing, just nature, just wind and scavengers and coincidence. But there was something about the way the forest seemed to be watching. The sense grew strongest near twilight when the trees became black silhouettes and the air felt brittle enough to crack in your lungs. I would catch myself turning suddenly, convinced I had glimpsed movement, a pale flash between trunks, the suggestion of height and weight. Once I thought I saw something crouched on a far ridge, still as a stone, but when I blinked it was gone. That night I dreamed of my father. He was lying in his hospital bed, his mouth open as though to speak, but the sound that came out was wind through dead branches. On the 7th day, I followed the river farther than before. The current ran fast and dark beneath a skin of ice. My boots slipped on the rocks. There was a smell in the air I couldn't place, sweet and rot, like fruit left too long in the sun. It grew stronger as I climbed a low rise above the river. And then I saw it. A moose carcass, half buried in snow. It had been opened from the chest down to the pelvis, its ribcage cracked wide. Most of the meat was gone, stripped in long, clean ribbons. The snow around it was black with frozen blood. But what made my stomach turn was the head. It had been twisted completely around, facing backward. I staggered back, gagging. The smell was thick, sickly. Wolves, I thought, or maybe a bear that fed and left. But the snow around it was untouched, no tracks, no drag marks. As though the carcass had just fallen apart where it lay. I couldn't stay. I stumbled back down to the river. The image burned into my eyelids. That night I locked the cabin door for the first time. The lock was stiff, rust grinding against rust, but it held. The forest was utterly silent. Even the wind had gone still. And then softly, distantly, a thump, followed by another, and another, slow, heavy, like something walking on two legs through deep snow. They passed somewhere beyond the clearing, fading into the trees. I held my breath until the silence returned. I told myself I'd imagined it. I had to. But when dawn came, I found prints circling the clearing. Broad, flat, five-toed, far too large to be human. They didn't approach the cabin, they just circled, as if inspecting. I barely slept after finding the moose. When I did drift off, it was into a shallow, frantic doze where the world tilted and spun and something with bone-white hands crawled through the cracks in my cabin walls. I woke shivering, my heart hammering like it was trying to escape my ribs. The cabin had gone silent again. Too silent. Even in winter, there's usually sound. Wind combing through pine needles, the distant groan of shifting snow, the occasional croak of a raven. But now the silence pressed against the windows like thick, cold glass. I told myself it was the weather. The air felt dense, like it was holding its breath. I forced myself outside. The sky was the color of old leaves, swollen and low, and snow fell in lazy spirals. My boots sank with a soft crunch that felt indecent in the hush. Every step felt louder than it should have. Too loud. I trudged toward the river trail, my sketchbook tucked under my coat. I had this absurd notion that if I could draw the landscape enough, capture every angle, every branch, I could pin it down like a butterfly and make it stop shifting under my feet. The moose carcass was gone. I stopped dead when I reached the low rise where it had been. The snow there was smooth and unbroken, like nothing had ever happened. No blood, no bones, no hollow where the body had melted the snow beneath it. Only a faint indentation, as if the ground itself had taken a breath and then exhaled. I turned in slow circles, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. Something inside me whispered, "This place rearranges itself when you're not looking." By midday, the snow thickened, muffling everything. The forest closed in, the trees shouldering closer together until the trail narrowed to a mere thread. I walked slower, not from fatigue, but because I couldn't shake the feeling of being shadowed. It wasn't just the sense of eyes on me, it was something deeper, more primal. My skin prickled. My breath felt too loud in my own ears. A twig snapped, very close. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. My boots slid, scraping frozen dirt. No one was there. Just the slow drift of snow, white flakes spiraling through air that felt suddenly too cold, too heavy. I swallowed hard, told myself it was a deer, or a branch sagging under snow. But when I turned back and started walking again, I could hear it, soft, deliberate crunches falling into rhythm with my own steps. I stopped. The sound stopped. My pulse thudded in my neck like fists pounding from the inside. I waited, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The forest waited with me. Then I forced myself to move again, fast and careless, crunching through drifts, kicking up sprays of snow. The sound came with me, almost too faint to be real. It stayed just far enough behind that I couldn't catch it if I turned suddenly. I reached the cabin with my hands numb from gripping my pack strap so hard. The door stuck as I shoved it open, as though something heavy had been leaning on it from the outside. Inside, the air was stale and close. My sketches lay scattered on the table where I'd left them, except a few had been rearranged, fanned out in a neat semicircle. I froze. I hadn't left them that way. I stood there a long time just listening. The rafters creaked softly. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I shoved the table hard enough that the sketches slid to the floor like fallen leaves. Then I locked the door, twice. That night the wind rose again. It started low, a faint sigh seeping through the chinks in the boards. Then it grew, clawing at the eaves, shaking the shutters until they rattled like loose teeth. I sat hunched on the floor in front of the wood stove, feeding it pine logs like offerings. The flames licked and hissed, throwing long, jerking shadows across the cabin walls. I tried to sketch, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every pencil stroke came out jagged, frantic. Shapes emerged from the graphite that I hadn't meant to draw. Long limbs, wide jaws, hunched backs like shattered arches. At some point I realized I was listening for footsteps under the scream of the wind. I dreamed again. This time I was a child, following my father up a snowy trail. The sky was black. He was whistling a tune I almost recognized, his breath blooming in pale bursts. Then he stopped mid-step and turned. His face was gone, just smooth skin like clay rubbed flat. Behind him, something vast and pale was crouched between the trees, its arms folded like knives. It tilted its head at me. I woke choking on a scream. Morning was worse. The storm had blown itself out, leaving the world sharp and too bright. The snow was knee-deep and glittered with a kind of glassy malice. The trees hunched under their burdens, skeletal against the sky. I told myself I had to go out again. If I stayed inside, I'd start imagining things. I was already imagining things. The forest was changed. At first, I couldn't figure out why it looked wrong. Then I realized the trees had moved. Not literally, of course. But the trail was different, twisting in subtle ways it hadn't before, bending between trunks that seemed closer together, narrower. It was like walking inside a painting that had been quietly rearranged while I blinked. My boots crunched through untouched snow. Not untouched, though. Not quite. Every so often I would see an indentation off the trail, a hollow where something large had pressed the snow flat. Always half filled by drifts, always distant enough that I couldn't see them clearly unless I stared too long. And staring too long made my eyes ache, like the shapes were writhing just out of sight. Midway up a ridge, I stopped to rest. My breath came out in heavy white bursts. That was when I heard it, a low, guttural moan, deep enough that I felt it in my chest more than heard it. It rose from far off in the trees, then cut off so abruptly that the silence rushed back in like a wave. I stood very still, my ears straining. Nothing, then crack farther upslope. Another crack, closer this time, as if something huge was moving from tree to tree. I bolted. Not a sprint, just fast, stumbling strides, my heart jackhammering so hard I thought I would vomit. Branches whipped my coat. Snow exploded under my boots. The forest seemed to watch me flee. When I finally stopped, doubled over and gasping, I realized I had no idea where I was. The trail was gone. Nothing but white and black and silence. I turned in frantic circles, scanning for my own tracks. They were there at first. Then a few yards back they just stopped, vanished into unbroken snow. I bit down on a cry hard enough to taste blood. You're tired, I told myself, hallucinating. Snow drifted over them, that's all. But the trees were wrong again. I swear they were closer now, crowding together like bars. Their shadows stretched too far, sharp as claws across the snow. I started walking in what I hoped was the right direction. My hands were numb. And not just from cold, there was a strange buzzing in them like holding a live wire. Somewhere behind me, snow crunched. I froze. Very slowly, I turned my head. Far back between the trees, something huge and pale shifted, just once like a man adjusting his weight. Then stillness. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. The thing was half concealed behind the trunks. Tall, broad, its head too high, its shoulders humped. I blinked. Gone. The trees stood innocent and black. I ran. By the time I stumbled back into the clearing around the cabin, twilight had fallen, heavy and purple. My legs barely held me. My breath came in sobbing gulps. The cabin door was ajar. I knew I had locked it. The interior was dark, cold. The fire had gone out. The smell of smoke was sour, faint, like old ashes. Something had been inside. My gear was scattered. My food packs ripped open, torn apart, not gnawed, not clawed, just shredded like paper. The shredded pieces were stacked in a neat, careful pile on the floor. My hands shook so hard I dropped my knife trying to pick it up. There were tracks on the floorboards, wet, wide, almost human. They led from the door to the center of the cabin and then simply stopped. No return prints, no marks of departure, just gone. That night I barricaded the door with furniture. I nailed the shutters closed with trembling hands. I sat in the dark with my father's knife and listened. The forest was awake out there, breathing, waiting. Every so often I would hear it, one slow step in the snow, then another, then silence, always circling. I didn't sleep. The cracks came one after another like the slow tearing of the world. I stood frozen on the slope, my breath fogging out in short, sharp bursts. Snow flurries twisted through the pines. The sound had come from just beyond the ridge line, wood snapping, heavy, deliberate, like a tree trunk being twisted apart. A cold, animal logic took hold of me. I sank to my knees and pressed myself flat to the snow. The chill soaked through my pants instantly, burning. I ignored it. I listened. At first, nothing. Then faint, rhythmic thuds, as though something massive was moving through the forest on padded feet, making the earth itself flinch. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was crouched there, heart beating in my skull. The next I was sliding downslope, scrambling for traction, my boots skidding through drifts. My shoulder slammed into a fallen log and I bit back a cry. The sound was still coming, closer now, and somehow both slow and fast, unhurried but inevitable. I didn't stop until I hit the river trail again. My chest ached. My throat tasted like metal. The forest had gone silent again, not calm, expectant. Snow sifted down through the branches. Somewhere far off, something gave a long, thin whistle. Wind, I told myself, even though the trees weren't moving. I walked fast. Too fast, really half running, every nerve screaming to get back to the cabin. I didn't even look at the ground until my boot hit something soft. I stumbled, caught myself, looked down, and froze. A deer, or what had once been one. Its body lay crumpled across the trail, legs splayed at impossible angles. The fur had been flayed away in strips as if peeled, and the skull was crushed inward like a cracked egg. Blood soaked the snow in a ragged halo, already crusting at the edges. But the worst part, the tracks. Huge, sunken impressions led away from the carcass, each nearly twice the size of my boot. Toes splayed like a human's, but longer, broader, as if something half man, half bear had passed this way. I crouched automatically, as if distance could make sense of it. The prints were deep, whatever made them had been heavy. I could see claw marks scored into the ice at the front edges, deep enough to catch shadow. Something inside me wanted to touch them, to prove they were real. My hand hovered halfway down before I jerked it back, because the prints didn't just go away from the deer, they circled it. Around and around in widening loops, as if whatever had killed it had danced around the body afterward, or watched it die, savoring the sound. I couldn't breathe. The whole forest seemed to be holding its breath with me. I backed away, slow and stiff, until the deer was just a dark shape behind me. Then I turned and ran. I don't know how long I ran. My vision tunneled down to the trampled snow under my boots, the blur of trees on either side. My ears filled with the raw drum of my heartbeat. Only when I saw the cabin through the trees did I stop, and then only because something was wrong. The door was open, just a hand's width, but enough that wind had blown snow inside. My gut went cold. I had locked it. I was sure I had locked it. I crept up the steps, holding my breath. The door creaked when I pushed it. Inside was silent. My sketches lay scattered on the floor where they'd fallen last night. The wood stove had gone cold. At first, nothing seemed missing. Then I saw it, the footprints. Faint, melting prints tracked across the floorboards, wet patches shaped like enormous bare feet, long-toed and splayed wide. They came in from the door, crossed the cabin, and stopped at the far wall. And then they were just gone, as if the thing that made them had ceased to exist mid-step, or stepped through the wall. My stomach lurched. My vision flickered at the edges, black creeping in. I dropped to my knees before I passed out. It was dark when I woke, curled on the cabin floor. My face was stuck to the wood with half-frozen sweat. The wind had risen again, shrieking around the eaves. Snow rattled the windows like thrown sand. I tried the radio. It hissed static at me as though the storm itself was speaking. No voices, no weather reports, nothing. The silence between the static bursts was worse than the static. I couldn't stay inside. That was the insane part. The cabin felt less safe than the forest. Like the walls were too thin, like something was already in here with me. So I bundled up, strapped on my snowshoes, and went back out into the night. The world had gone white. Moonlight silvered the snow into a flat, blinding sheet. The air cut like glass in my lungs. My flashlight beam caught on something ahead, shattered branches, scattered like bones across the trail. I crept closer, snow squealing under my shoes. Trees had been ripped apart, not fallen, twisted. Huge spruce trunks spiraled open like wet paper, splinters driven deep into the snow. Sap glittered like frozen blood. The smell hit me next, sharp, sweet, undercut with something fouler, musky, animal. I raised the light. High up on one trunk, something had been smeared, a wide handprint, almost luminous in the moonlight. I stepped closer. It wasn't sap, it was blood. And embedded in the wood, half swallowed by the torn bark, was a scrap of cloth. Plaid, human. The edges were stiff with frozen blood. My mind flinched away. I knew every local within 50 miles. No one should be out here. No hikers, no hunters, just me. Unless someone had come and not gone back. Then came the scream. It tore through the night from somewhere upslope, so raw and human that my spine turned to ice. A long, choking wail that rose higher and higher until it broke off mid-note. Silence slammed down. I couldn't move. I stood there trembling while my brain screamed, run, 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 but my body was stone. Then movement. Something massive sliding between the trees just at the edge of my vision, pale against the dark. My light snapped toward it. Nothing. Just snow drifting from a branch, but the smell lingered, thick and rank and sweet like rotting meat steeped in pine needles. I ran. Branches whipped my face, snapped under my boots. My light jerked wildly over the trees. Snow clawed at my legs like hands. Behind me, something followed, not close but constant, always just far enough that when I turned my light I saw only shifting shadows. It didn't chase. It herded. Every time I veered off the trail, the sound of its steps shifted, cutting me off, nudging me back, guiding me. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, hours, time dissolved into breath and heartbeat and blind panic. When I finally burst into the clearing near the cabin, twilight had fallen, heavy and purple. My legs barely held me. My breath came in sobbing gulps. The cabin door was ajar. I knew I had locked it. The interior was dark, cold. The fire had gone out. The smell of smoke was sour, faint, like old ashes. Something had been inside. My gear was scattered. My food packs ripped open, torn apart, not gnawed, not clawed, just shredded like paper. The shredded pieces were stacked in a neat, careful pile on the floor. My hands shook so hard I dropped my knife trying to pick it up. There were tracks on the floorboards, wet, wide, almost human. They led from the door to the center of the cabin and then simply stopped. No return prints. No marks of departure, just gone. That night, I barricaded the door with furniture. I nailed the shutters closed with trembling hands. I sat in the dark with my father's knife and listened. The forest was awake out there, breathing, waiting. Every so often I would hear it, one slow step in the snow, then another, then silence, always circling. I didn't sleep. Snow drifted from the branch like slow-burning ash, spiraling in my beam. I stood there for what might have been seconds or an hour, lungs straining against my ribs, waiting for the shape to return, the pale blur slipping between trees. Nothing moved. Not the branches, not the stars, not the world. Only my heartbeat rattling my skull from inside. Then somewhere beyond the ridge, something cracked. I bolted. The run back to the cabin shredded my memory into white scraps. I remember the crunch of snow, the tearing pain in my side, my light beam slicing wild arcs over the trail. Every shadow looked like something standing still, watching me. When I slammed the door shut, it splintered at the frame. The sound echoed like gunfire in the cramped dark. I dragged the heavy oak table in front of the door until the legs screeched. My hands were shaking so hard the lamp nearly toppled when I lit it. Golden light bled across the cabin, chasing the darkness to the corners where it seemed to crouch and wait. The floor was still stained where I had lain earlier, my shape outlined in sweat like a ghost of myself. The footprints were gone. That was the first wrong thing. The wet impressions, the two wide toes, the splayed weight had vanished. Not melted, not smudged. Just gone as if they'd been painted over by the air itself. I stared until my eyes watered, blinking hard, certain they would swim back into view. But the boards were bare, clean, almost too clean, stripped of dust as if something had licked them. A hollow ringing started behind my eyes. I thought of my phone. Maybe the signal had returned. Maybe the world was still out there. No bars, just the black glass showing my reflection, pale face, eyes ringed black, pupils blown wide, my breath fogged across it. For an instant, the fog made it look like my reflection was smiling. I dropped the phone. It bounced under the bed. I didn't reach for it. The wind built through the night, screeching in the eaves like nails dragged over slate. I curled on the cot, boots still on, lamp burning low. Every creak in the logs made my muscles lock. I could hear the forest breathing deep and slow just beyond the walls. Once, half dreaming, I thought I heard footsteps on the roof. Not the light patter of snow or the scurry of squirrels. Heavy, measured, crossing above me. Then silence, vast and weightless. I pressed my face into the pillow and whispered to myself until my own voice became meaningless sound. It's nothing. It's wind. It's nothing. At dawn, the world outside had become a wound. Snow shredded the horizon into gray rags. The trees stood flayed by ice, their bark stripped in long, curling ribbons. I stepped onto the porch and the boards moaned like something dying. The silence had teeth. Every motion I made felt like an intrusion, like I was walking across a cathedral floor mid-prayer. I needed proof I wasn't imagining it, that someone else had seen. So I followed the trail upslope toward where the scream had come from. The woods swallowed me whole. My snowshoes creaked and hissed. My breath burned. The storm had smoothed away all tracks, erasing the night as if it hadn't happened. Only the broken trees remained, snapped like chalk, their splintered hearts glaring white. And blood. At first I thought it was just sap again, amber streaks frozen hard. But no, it was darker, crusted black around the edges, spattered high up on the trunks as if flung from a great height. The smell was what undid me. Copper and rot, faint but insistent, threading through the cold, the stink of open things. It led me to the hollow. The hollow had once been a hunter's camp. I'd passed it before, a ring of stones, a collapsed lean-to, a fire pit gone green with moss. Now it was a slaughterhouse. Snow lay churned and red. The lean-to was smashed flat, beams driven like spears into the ground. Shreds of nylon and canvas clung to the trees like skin. A backpack lay split open, its contents sprayed across the clearing. Socks, granola bars, a crushed thermos, and bones. So many bones. Human. The shapes undeniable even under the frost. Ribs splayed like broken bird cages, femurs gnawed to white splinters, a spine curled upon itself like a question. The skull sat upright on a stump. Jaw missing. Eye sockets full of snow. Something had arranged this. The thought came clear, cold, without emotion. It's playing with them. My vision tilted. I sank to my knees and dry heaved into the snow until bile burned my throat. When I lifted my head, there were footprints all around me. Wide, deep, circling, fresh. The wind hadn't touched them yet. And in the center, between the prints, something else. A single human hand, severed at the wrist, upright in the snow like it was reaching for me. The flesh black with frost, the nails torn. A wedding band clung to the fourth finger. I ran. The forest chased me, howling without sound. Branches clawed my coat, snagged my hood, tried to hold me. My feet tangled in roots. I fell hard, teeth cracking against my tongue, tasted iron, pushed up and ran again. By the time I saw the cabin roof through the trees, I was sobbing without noise, breath coming in animal gasps. The table lay shoved aside when I burst through the door. I had left it braced across the frame. Now it stood in the corner, perfectly upright, as if someone had carried it gently there. Snow speckled the floorboards, melting. Huge splayed prints leading from the door to the cot. My blankets were neatly folded. On top sat my sketchbook. It was open to a page I hadn't drawn. Black charcoal lines filled the sheet, frantic and looping, forming the shape of a towering, ape-like figure crouched among trees. The face was blank. No eyes, no mouth, just a white void where features should be. And at the bottom, in my own handwriting, though I had no memory of writing it, "You are inside it now." I don't remember screaming. I only remember the sound of my own voice echoing back to me, warped, not quite matching, half a second behind, like something else was mimicking me from somewhere deep under the floor. I clawed at the book, tore the page out, crumpled it, shoved it into the stove, struck a match. It wouldn't burn. The flame curled away from it like it was alive. The page blackened but didn't catch, as if the charcoal lines themselves were repelling fire. I slammed the stove door and locked it, and sat on the floor with my head between my knees, until the room stopped spinning. I tried the radio again, static. Then, for one sliver of a second, a voice, distant and thin as though calling across water. "You hear, run," then gone. The static closed like teeth. I hurled the radio at the wall. It shattered. Silence rushed in. I'm losing time now. Hours vanish. Sometimes I find myself standing outside with no coat, snow past my ankles, staring at the tree line as if waiting for something to step out. Sometimes I wake to find the lamp burning down to nothing. My sketches rearranged on the floor in spirals. My name slips from me. I whisper it sometimes just to remember. Eli, 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 but it sounds wrong, like someone else's mouth is shaping it for me. Tonight the wind has died, the silence is worse. It's pressing in from all sides, thick and oily like the air has weight. The cabin walls bow inward like a held breath. There are scratches under the floorboards, soft, intermittent, like claws tracing patterns in the wood grain. Sometimes they pause exactly when I lean down to listen, as if they know. I can't tell what's real anymore. The forest, the snow, the blood, maybe they're just extensions of it, camouflage grown around me. Maybe the cabin isn't shelter at all. Maybe it's its mouth, and I'm already inside. I woke with my cheek pressed against the frozen ground, breath feathering out in small white puffs, the world reduced to brittle cold and an aching skull. For a moment I didn't know where I was. The sky above was a slate-gray lid, and thin snow flurries danced across it, carried sideways by sharp gusts. My body felt like it belonged to someone else, slow, heavy, trembling. Then memories seeped back like meltwater. The cabin, the shredded supplies, Cole's broken scream echoing in the dark. I sat up fast, heart jolting, and scanned the clearing. The cabin was a blackened silhouette against the snow, door hanging on one hinge, claw marks gouged across the wood like hieroglyphs of violence. Cole was gone. Only the faint disturbance of blood-dark snow near the tree line remained, leading into the forest. A hollow sob rose in my throat before I could stop it. He had been there, and then not, erased as though the world had closed around him like a fist. I forced myself up, swaying, and gathered what was left of my pack. Inside, a dented thermos, some rope, 2 flares, and a folding knife sticky with dried blood. My gloves were stiff with frost, and my breath rasped loud in the silence. Too loud. I kept expecting an echo, a reply. There was none. I followed the trail. Snow squeaked beneath my boots, each step a sharp crack in the otherwise muffled forest. The pines crowded close, trunks like the bars of a cage. Here and there I found hints, broken branches high above my head, bark stripped in long vertical scars, great depressions in the snow where something had knelt or crouched. It was like following the wake of an avalanche that had chosen to walk. Hours might have passed, or minutes. The light never seemed to change. My thoughts drifted, fragmented. I found myself thinking about my mother's garden back in Montana, how I used to hide beneath the lilacs when my parents fought. I'd close my eyes and imagine roots curling down into the earth, holding the world together. Here, the forest felt like it wanted to tear itself apart. A smear of blood appeared ahead, stark red against the white, dragging sideways behind a boulder. My body tightened like a wire. I crouched, touching the stain. It was half frozen, crusted. Beside it were tracks deep as craters, each one nearly twice the size of my boot, spaced impossibly far apart. And they weren't in a straight line. They curved, meandered, doubled back. Deliberate, searching. My stomach twisted. I wanted to run. Instead, I kept moving. By dusk, the forest had gone silent. No birds, no wind. Even the distant creak of branches had stopped, as if the world were holding its breath. My own heartbeat sounded obscene in my ears. I stopped beside a fallen tree, sank to my knees, and hugged my pack to my chest. Tears stung my eyes, half from cold, half from sheer exhaustion. I whispered Cole's name once just to make a sound. It dissolved into the stillness like smoke. Then snow shifted somewhere behind me, a soft crunch, almost polite. I froze, listening so hard my skull hurt. Another step, closer this time. My breath caught, I couldn't even blink. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head. Between two pines stood something enormous. At first I thought it was part of the trees themselves, a tangle of white and gray, hunched, motionless. Then it moved. The shape unfolded from the shadows like something remembering how to be alive. Its shoulders were sloped and vast, fur matted with clotted snow and something darker. Its arms hung too long, ending in hands that flexed slowly, claws glinting like wet glass. But its eyes were white. Not pale, not colorless, white like ice lit from within. They fixed on me without blinking, and I felt something shift deep inside my chest, a cold thread pulling tight around my heart. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The creature tilted its head, slow as a glacier. Then it stepped back, melting into the darkness between the trees. One heartbeat it was there, the next there was only emptiness. I don't remember standing, I only remember running. Branches whipped my face. Snow exploded around my boots. My lungs burned like coal. Behind me, the forest stayed silent, too silent. My panic only grew heavier, more frantic. I didn't know where I was going, only away. Away from those eyes. Away from the thing that had looked at me like I was a page it had yet to read. At some point, the trees thinned, opening onto a narrow gorge. The wind screamed up from below, cold enough to peel the air from my teeth. Across the gap was a thin ridge like a knife edge. A ruined footbridge clung to the rocks, half collapsed, ropes frayed and boards iced over. It looked like it would disintegrate under a snowflake's weight. But there was no choice. I scrambled onto the first board. It groaned like a dying animal. I kept low, crawling, gripping the ropes so hard the fibers bit into my gloves. The abyss yawned beneath me, bottomless and black. Somewhere below, water roared unseen. Halfway across, the wind rose to a shriek, and from the trees behind me came a sound. A howl, long and low and layered with tones no human throat could produce. It seemed to pass through the bones of the mountain itself. The boards jumped under me as if struck. My heart convulsed. I clawed forward inches at a time. Snow stung my eyes. Another howl, closer this time, and beneath it I heard other sounds. Wood splintering, rope snapping. A board broke behind me with a crack like a gunshot. I lunged. My hand caught the far ledge as the bridge ripped away, vanishing into the dark with a fatting rattle of wood. I lay there gasping, face pressed to the ice, listening to the wind fill the silence where the howls had been. Night had fallen by the time I found shelter. It was a hunter's shack, or what was left of one, half buried in snow, roof caved in, door gone. Inside, the air was stale with rot and old smoke. Animal bones lay in the corners, gnawed clean. I cleared a space with trembling hands and collapsed. My body shook uncontrollably. Even wrapped in my coat, the cold sank into me like claws. Every shadow twitched at the edges of my sight. I thought about building a fire. Then imagined those white eyes catching the glow and stayed in the dark. Sleep came in fragments, each one shattered by invisible footsteps crunching just outside, or the faint rasp of claws on wood. Once I dreamed I was back in the garden, hiding under the lilacs, and snow was falling through the petals, piling on my chest until I couldn't breathe. When dawn finally bled through the cracks, I crawled out stiff and hollow-eyed. The forest had changed overnight. The trees leaned inward like eavesdroppers. There were new marks in the snow, huge prints circling the shack in widening spirals, overlapping, layered. Watching, waiting. They hadn't attacked. Not yet. They were learning me. I trudged on. The terrain climbed sharply, pines giving way to black cliffs veined with ice. The air thin, dry, and sharp as glass. My thoughts frayed, snagging on fragments of memory. Cole laughing as we unpacked the car. The way the wind had carried his scream. My mother's hands digging in the soil, turning earthworms like tiny pale veins. By afternoon, the sky had gone the color of dirty wool. Snow began again. Heavier now, smothering my tracks almost as fast as I made them. I stumbled into a ravine where the wind didn't reach and stopped to drink melted snow from my thermos. It tasted like iron, My lips cracked. My teeth ached from clenching. Something moved above me on the ridge. A flicker of pale fur between boulders, then gone. I stared up until my eyes burned, but the rocks were empty. Still, I could feel it like a weight in the air pressing down on the back of my skull. Watching. Waiting. I whispered, "Why don't you just kill me?" The words disappeared into the snow. No answer. Only the wind curling down the ravine like laughter. That night I found another clearing, this one littered with carcasses. Not fresh, weathered, sunken, their shapes half lost under the snow. Deer, foxes, something larger that might have been a bear once. All of them torn open, ribs like white cages, skulls cracked as though by giant hands. There were human bones, too. I knew it before I saw the boot sole jutting from the drift. I stood there shaking, unable to move, my mind turning in slow circles. This was where they fed. This was where they brought things to die. A sound rose behind me, so close I felt the snow tremble. I turned. 10 feet away between the trees stood the creature. Not hunched this time, upright, towering. Its fur was the color of old snow, streaked dark at the claws. Its chest rose and fell with vast, slow breaths. Those white eyes fixed on me, and for a moment the world narrowed to 2 points of light in a sea of black. It stepped closer. I couldn't scream, couldn't run. My body wouldn't obey. Something primal in me recognized it, not as an animal, not as a legend, but as a force. As something the world had tried to bury under ice and forgotten, but never killed. It stopped a few feet away, tilted its head, listening to my heartbeat. The air stank of musk and rot. Its breath steamed in heavy gusts, dampening my face. A sound rumbled from its chest, not a growl, not a snarl, something slower, curious. Then, in a blur of motion, it reached out. Its claw traced down my coat. Not striking, testing. And then it was gone, crashing into the dark with a speed that broke the air like thunder. I stood alone among bones, my heart trying to tear its way out of my ribs. It hadn't killed me. It could have, but it hadn't. It was playing, and it was getting closer. The marks in the snow were deeper now. I knelt at the tree line, staring at them through the trembling blur of my breath. They led away from the ruined shack like a trail left by something dragging enormous weights through the drifts. Not footprints anymore, trenches. As if whatever made them had started moving on all fours, or stopped caring about leaving signs behind. The forest was gray and still. The cold pressed close, dense as wet wool. Every sound seemed muffled, wrapped in frost. My fingers felt like glass as I packed my few remaining things, forcing my mind to obey even as it skittered like a cornered animal. I didn't think about Cole. I didn't think about the way the wide-eyed thing had looked at me last night. Thinking about either would shatter the fragile, brittle crust of my control. I just followed the trenches. They led me deeper into the mountains. The trees thinned, the air sharpening with altitude, each breath cutting my throat raw. Around noon, snow began to fall, thin at first, then thick, churning down like torn feathers. The world shrank to gray tunnel, shapes fading and reappearing at the edges of sight. I walked in a bubble of silence broken only by the soft crush of my boots and the occasional cracking groan of overloaded branches. Sometimes I caught movement behind me, a flicker, a tremor in the whiteness, but when I spun around there was nothing. Only the churn of snow swallowing my trail. My paranoia grew roots. I imagined shapes in the tree line, hunched figures packing me just beyond visibility, shadows bleeding from tree to tree. My mind whispered, "They're hurting you. They're driving you somewhere." I whispered back, voice hoarse, "Shut up." The snow swallowed my words whole. By late afternoon, the trail dove down into a narrow ravine. Walls of stone rose on either side, slick with frozen runoff, trees clinging to their edges like ragged eyelashes. The sky was only a slit overhead. The trenches grew sharper here, pressed deep into the hard snow as if from enormous weight. I followed them until the ravine ended at a cliff of black rock and a yawning mouth in its base. A cave. Its entrance was a ragged wound, rimmed with icicles like broken teeth. From within came a breath of air, warm and damp, carrying the copper-stale tang of blood and the animal reek of fur gone rank with decay. The smell hit me like a fist. My body rebelled, bile scorched my throat. I clutched the rock wall to stay upright. Part of me wanted to turn and run until my legs tore themselves apart. Another part knew there was nowhere left to run to. Something inside the cave shifted. Just a faint scrape. a whisper of stone on stone. Then silence again, as complete and crushing as the snow above. The darkness seemed to throb as if it were alive, listening. My body moved without asking my mind. I dug out one of the flares from my pack, my fingers clumsy, and struck it. The flare's light bled red over the rock, dripping shadows like ink. I ducked inside. The air turned thick, humid, stinking. My breath echoed off the stone. The walls were close at first, forcing me to squeeze sideways, my coat snagging on jagged edges. Then the passage widened, sloping down into a chamber large enough to swallow houses. The ceiling vanished into darkness. The floor was uneven, broken by heaps of stone and glistening puddles of meltwater. The red glow of my flare barely scratched the dark. Then I saw the bones. They lay in heaps, half buried in the gravel and snowmelt. Some were clean, bleached. Others were still strung with rotting sinew. Skulls stared from the dark, eye sockets slick with shadow. They weren't all animal. My knees locked. I crouched and touched one, human jaw, teeth cracked. There was a shred of red nylon jacket still tangled around the spine. Something crunched behind me. I spun so fast the flare spat sparks. The sound came again, closer, wet, deliberate, like meat sliding off bone. The darkness rippled. My eyes found shapes where no light reached, pale forms uncoiling from the cavern walls, taller than any man, arms dangling, fingers brushing the ground. Fur matted, slick with filth. Their breath steamed faintly, rising from holes that might have been nostrils or just wounds that never closed. White eyes opened one by one, dotting the dark like stars in a night sky gone mad. They had been here the whole time, perfectly still, watching. I didn't think. I ran. Cave roared awake around me. Claws struck stone. A shriek split the air, high, furious, full of human-like hate. The sound made my vision sheer white. I scrambled over bones, slipping, crashing down, scrambling again. The flare swung wildly in my hand, smearing the world in red arcs. Behind me came thunderous impacts, the rocks shuddering with every step of the things that followed. Something slammed into the ground beside me, sending up a spray of bone shards. A claw grazed my arm. Heat and pain bloomed. I screamed. My voice echoed like broken glass. I saw a crack in the far wall, a thin fissure barely wide enough to squeeze through. I hurled myself toward it. A hand the size of a shovel struck the stone inches from my head, spraying chips. I dove into the fissure, ribs scraping, and jammed myself through as the flare guttered out, plunging the world into blackness. I crawled blind through stone. The passage was so tight I could barely move my arms. My shoulders screamed. The smell of blood and wet fur clung to me like oil. Behind, claws scraped against the rock, slow and patient, as if the creatures knew there was no way out, that they could take their time. I forced myself forward, sobbing through clenched teeth, fingernails splitting as I clawed for every inch. Minutes or hours passed. The sound of pursuit ebbed, then rose again, then stopped altogether. That was worse. Not knowing if they'd given up or were simply waiting, letting me exhaust myself before finishing it. At last the passage widened enough for me to stand hunched. The floor sloped down steeply, slick with slime. I slid more than walked. The air grew colder again, fresher. My heart climbed my throat. Ahead, a dim silver glow seeped through a curtain of icicles. I burst through and found myself in a cathedral of ice. The chamber was vast and open, its walls sheer blue-white, streaked with veins of darker stone. Pillars of ice soared into darkness. Stalactites hung like the jaws of some immense frozen beast. Moonlight filtered through cracks high above, casting a spectral glow over everything. The floor was a mirror of frozen water, clouded with bloodstains locked just beneath the surface like ghosts suspended in glass. At the center lay something that stopped my breath. It was a nest, or what passed for one. A hollow carved into the ice, lined with furs and shredded clothing, bones woven through like wicker. Within it lay a mound of snow-stiff corpses, deer, wolves, something that might have been a bear, and among them unmistakably a human shape. The face was gone, torn away. Only the hair remained, black and stiff with frost. Cold. My legs folded. A sound tore out of me, small and raw. I crawled forward, numb. His jacket was shredded open, ribs cracked like splintered wood. His eyes were missing, just hollow sockets stuffed with snow. Around his corpse lay objects scattered like discarded toys, a cracked phone, a broken compass, boots with feet still inside. Offerings, trophies. A low growl rippled through the chamber. I lifted my head, tears freezing on my face. The creatures were here. They stepped from the shadows without sound, white eyes flickering in the moonlight. 3 of them, taller than doors, shoulders sloping, claws dragging lines through the ice. Their faces were the worst, too flat, half-human, skin stretched thin over bone ridges. Their breath steamed in rhythm, in unison, like the synchronized exhalations of something with a single mind spread across multiple bodies. They fanned out, cutting off every exit. One of them tilted its head, studying me. The others stilled, as if waiting. My heart thrashed, frantic and useless. There was nowhere to run, no bridge to collapse behind me this time. The cavern's air pressed down, thick as stone. I reached slowly into my pack. My fingers found the last flare. Its scrape was deafening. The hiss of ignition shattered the silence like glass. The creatures recoiled from the burst of red light, white eyes narrowing to slits. I didn't wait. I hurled the flare into the nest. Fire splashed across the frozen corpses, furs crackling, steam exploding upward. The smell of burning hair and meat hit like a physical blow. The creatures screamed, not howled, screamed, raw, ragged, almost human, as if something deep inside them remembered pain. They lunged as the nest ignited, flames leaping high enough to lick the ceiling. I dove between 2 of them, claws raking the air inches from my skull, and sprinted across the ice toward the nearest wall. Cracks webbed the surface under my boots. I didn't care, I just ran. Behind me, the nest collapsed in a storm of fire and smoke. The cavern howled like a wounded throat. I hit the wall shoulder first and found a narrow chute leading upward. Without thinking, I clawed into it, fingers bleeding, dragging myself up as heat and fury roared below. Ice gave way under my nails. My vision shrank to a tunnel. The screams rose to a pitch so high it seemed to drill through my skull. Then, air. Cold, clean, open air slamming my lungs like knives. I tumbled out onto the mountainside, snow blinding white under the moon. The cave mouth below vomited smoke and red light. Shapes thrashed within it, shadows too large, too fast. I staggered to my feet. Somehow I had escaped them, for now. For a long time I just stood there. My body was trembling, not from cold, but from the raw, splintering exhaustion that had fused itself into my bones. The chamber felt unreal, like the echo of some nightmare too immense to fit inside a human skull. The frozen lake beneath me crackled faintly as I shifted my weight. Every sound I made was thunder in the silence. The nest loomed at the center, and what lay within it finally dragged my gaze down. Bodies. At least 6, maybe more, entangled like roots, their limbs woven together by strips of frozen sinew knotted with tufts of fur. Some were half-eaten, ribcage open like broken cages, faces peeled back to wet muscle. Others were only bones swaddled in scraps of fabric. A child's parka, a boot still wrapped around a leg that ended in splintered white stalks. My stomach tried to turn itself inside out. I clamped my jaw shut so hard my teeth sparked pain. Then I saw something worse. Their skulls, what was left of them, were arranged in a ring around the nest, upright, balanced carefully on splinters of ice. Their empty sockets all faced inward toward a single object in the center, a human head perfectly intact, eyes frozen wide, lips drawn back in a grin that was not its own. A grotesque idol. It wasn't just feeding. It was ritual. It was art. They were thinking. Sound cracked across the cavern like breaking glass. My head snapped up. Snow sifted from one of the ice pillars. A shape moved high along the wall, fast, fluid, a pale blur darting from shadow to shadow. Another stirred behind the nest, so still until it was. A third crouched atop a ledge, white eyes reflecting the moonlight like splinters of bone. They had been waiting. A low, vibrating growl rolled through the chamber, resonating in my chest. The nearest creature rose from its crouch, uncurling to its full height. Its head nearly brushed the frozen ceiling. It stepped toward me on knuckled fists, each motion deliberate, precise, silent despite its bulk. Snow crackled faintly under its claws. It was not charging, it was circling. Another dropped from the ledge behind me with a muted thump. The air compressed. They fanned out, forming a loose crescent. Their eyes never blinked. I could see the calculation in them, cold and patient. They weren't attacking because they didn't need to. I realized too late what this was. They were hunting me the way cats play with mice. Something in me snapped. I ran. My boots skidded on the frozen lake, slamming echoes up the chamber walls. The Yetis moved instantly, fluid as smoke. One blurred across my path, forcing me to veer. Another's claws scythed through the air inches from my back. I hit the ice hard enough to knock the air from my lungs, slid, scrambled upright again. My breath came in knives. I bolted toward the far wall where a narrow crack bled faint moonlight. A roar detonated behind me. It wasn't just sound, it was force. It hit the ice, the walls, my bones. The surface beneath me split like glass under a hammer. Water surged up through widening fissures. My legs plunged through icy slush. The cold knife straight to the marrow. I screamed and clawed my way onto solid ice just as one of the creatures lunged. Its arm shot past my face, claws carving furrows in the ice. I saw its mouth for the first time. A lipless maw splitting its skull, ringed with ragged teeth, steaming with rot. Strings of dark meat hung from them like kelp. I jammed my last flare between its teeth and slammed it shut. The burst of red light and hissing fire tore a screech from its throat. It recoiled, thrashing, smoke pouring from its mouth. I bolted for the crack. The tunnel beyond the ice chamber was low and crooked. I crawled, hands slipping on slick stone, lungs burning. Behind, the cavern filled with fury, snarls, howls, the shattering boom of claws on ice. The tunnel trembled. Snow cascaded from the ceiling. They were coming. The passage forked. I chose left without thinking. It twisted sharply, then plunged downward like a throat. Darkness folded around me. My headlamp flickered and died, leaving only the faint ghost glow of moonlight from somewhere ahead. I slid on my belly through a chute of stone, slammed into a wall, rebounded, kept going. My body was just a rag being dragged by terror. Then the floor vanished. I fell through blackness and hit something soft and wet. The stench of rot hit me like a club. My hands sank wrist-deep in pulped flesh. I was in another chamber, smaller, tighter, ceiling so low I had to crouch. The walls glistened with something dark that steamed faintly in the cold. The floor was a mulch of meat and fur and shattered bone. The air was warm, too warm and wet, as if the rock itself was sweating blood. They had stored their kills here, not as trophies, as food. There was a rhythm in the dark, a wet, slow chewing sound. My ears strained. It was close, just around a bend of the wall. My mind begged my body to stay still. My body didn't listen. I crept forward step by soundless step until I could see around the bend. One of them was feeding. It crouched over a human torso, its long arms folded like a mantis's, claws delicately stripping flesh from bone. Its back was a mountain of fur and scars. Steam rose from the wound it had opened, carrying the smell of iron and bile. It made no noise except the soft tearing of meat. Its head lifted. It looked directly at me. I ran without breathing. It shrieked, an ululating, furious scream that made my vision strobe. Claws hammered the walls behind me. I scrambled through the chamber, slipping in gore, smashing my knees against rock. The tunnel ahead narrowed to a jagged crack. I dove for it just as the creature lunged. Its arm jammed into the crack after me, claws snapping. One raked my calf open like paper. Fire shot up my leg. I kicked and thrashed, skin ripping on the stone, and somehow wriggled through. I half crawled, half slid down a twisting chute that spat me onto a ledge overlooking a vertical shaft. Cold air blasted up from below. Moonlight glimmered far down. I hesitated only long enough to hear the Yeti shrieking behind me and jumped. The fall stole my breath. I hit a slope of packed snow, rolled, slammed into a rock outcrop, and lay stunned as the world spun. Something in my ribs screamed with every breath, but I was outside. The sky was open above me, a ragged smear of stars and wind-scoured cloud. The forest crouched below, black and immense. Behind, the cave mouth gaped in the cliff face like a wound. A pale shape stood in it, too tall, too still, watching. Another loomed beside it, and another. More pairs of white eyes blinked open all along the cliff. A whole wall of them, silent, patient, waiting, not giving chase, because they didn't need to, because the forest below me was theirs too. I stumbled down the slope through boulders and broken trees, every step leaving a ribbon of blood from my leg. The wind rose, howling like something alive. Branches clawed at me. The snow swallowed all sound except my breath. I didn't know where I was going anymore, only away, away, away. But as I limped into the tree line, a sound rose from the darkness behind me. Not howls. Laughter, dry and cracked like branches snapping under ice. Not human, but shaped like human mirth, twisted until it was something else entirely. It rippled through the forest, overlapping, multiplying, coming from everywhere at once. They were following, not chasing, herding. And somewhere deep in the black heart of the woods, they were laughing because they already knew where I was going, where they wanted me to go. Too tall, too still. The shape stood in the cave mouth, framed by moonlight and the whipping snow, its silhouette bleeding into the wind like smoke. It did not move, not even as I staggered to my feet, ribs screaming. For one awful moment, I hoped it was a trick of the dark, a shard of rock shaped like horror. Then its head tilted, a smooth, soundless motion like an owl studying prey. A second shape slithered from the darkness behind it. Then a third, crouching low, its arms swinging with pendulous weight. They stepped out onto the cliff edge. Snow hissed beneath their claws. Even in the open night, they were silent as falling ash. They were not retreating back into their lair. They were coming down after me. The slope was too steep to run upright, so I half ran, half fell, crashing through drifts that swallowed my legs to the thigh. Branches clawed my arms as I plunged into the tree line, pine needles snapping like bone under my boots. The forest devoured the moonlight instantly. The shadows swallowed me whole. But behind me there was always motion, always white, always just beyond the corner of my vision. Every few seconds a branch cracked somewhere to my left, then to my right, then ahead, forcing me to veer, to stumble off the slope. They were no longer chasing in a straight line. They were fanning out, shepherding, driving me somewhere. The realization hit like an axe buried in my spine. They weren't just following, they were hurting. I ran harder, lungs scalding, my blood a furnace. Wind sliced tears from my eyes. The forest blurred into smears of black and silver. My breath came ragged and loud, and that was when I noticed the silence. No birds, no rustling, no life. Even the wind had stopped. The air itself felt waiting. I skidded to a halt. My boots carved trenches in the crusted snow. My heart was punching my ribs like it wanted out. I turned a slow circle. Snow drifted through the beam of my weak headlamp. My breath smoked like ghosts. Nothing moved, then something whispered, a dry rasp like claws combing through bark. Close. I spun. My light caught a shape between two trees, gone as fast as it appeared. The trees behind me creaked. When I turned again, there was only darkness. They were circling tighter now. Panic curdled into something hotter, something sharp. I couldn't run anymore. They were pushing me like cattle. I had to break the pattern, do something they didn't expect. I fumbled through my pack, hands shaking so violently I could barely unzip it. Inside were only scraps, a half-dead headlamp, 2 road flares, 1 hunting knife, and the flare gun, my last piece of real hope. I yanked it free, spun toward the densest wall of trees, and fired straight into the sky. The flare hissed up screaming red light, burst against the clouds like blood. The forest exploded in movement. Snow geysered as one of them vaulted from the shadows, claws outstretched, face split in that nightmare rictus. The red light painted its fur the color of flayed muscle. It hit the ground where I stood a second before, cracking frozen earth like pottery. I threw myself sideways into the undergrowth as it howled, a sound like tearing metal and dying stars. Then everything went black again. I ran, no plan, no direction, just away. The ground dropped without warning. I tumbled down a steep ravine, smashing through dead branches, teeth cracking against my tongue. I landed in an icy creek at the bottom, water knifing up through my clothes. The shock was almost enough to stop my heart. I staggered upright. Water licked at my calves. My leg, the one clawed back in the cave, was numb, blood freezing in ragged trails down to my boot. My ribs screamed each time I breathed. Every part of me was breaking down, but I had to keep moving. The creek wound between sheer banks, funneling me deeper. Overhead the stars blinked out as clouds rolled in, heavy and black. Snow began to fall, thick, wet, endless. Within minutes it muffled everything, my footsteps, the creek, my breath. Sound was gone, sight blurred. I was a ghost staggering through a white void. And then I saw it. A cabin. Just a hulk of dark wood leaning under the snow, slumped against the roots of a cliff. Its roof had half collapsed, but smoke-black scars still marked the chimney stones. There was no light, no path, no footprints, no hope, but it was shelter. I crawled the last few feet, half frozen, clawed the door open with raw hands and fell inside. The smell hit first. Rot, damp fur, copper. The cabin's single room was gutted, beams sagging, windows punched out. A broken stove rusted in one corner, surrounded by drifts of wind-blown snow. The walls were carved with gouges, deep parallel grooves that flayed through the wood. Something had been here, recently. I slammed the door anyway and wedged the broken table under the handle. Then I collapsed against the far wall, sucking in shuddering breaths, my head swimming. For a few trembling moments it was silent. Then the roof creaked. A soft patter of snow sifted from the rafters. I froze. My heartbeat thundered in my teeth. Something was moving up there, slow, deliberate, weightless as falling ash. Claws rasped across the roof. One long drag, then another. They had followed me. They had let me run. Now they were closing the trap. The door shuddered. Snow burst inward through the gaps. A deep thrumming growl reverberated through the walls. The table legs squealed against the floorboards as the handle bowed inward. They were at the door, at the roof, at the walls. I raised the flare gun with both hands. My arms shook so hard I could barely aim. The doorframe splintered. A claw slid through the crack, hooked and patient. Another slammed the roof so hard the whole cabin jumped. I fired. The flare hit the door point blank, detonating in a shriek of red fire. The door blew outward. Snow howled in. I bolted through the flames. The night was chaos, white and black and screaming red. I tore across the clearing, snow spraying from my boots. Behind me, the cabin erupted, the roof imploding under a massive white shape that hit it like a meteor. Logs exploded into the air. One clipped my shoulder and sent me spinning. I scrambled back up, sobbing, lungs boiling. They came after me as one. 3 pale giants, fluid as smoke, slashing through the trees in perfect silence. Their eyes were coals in the dark. Their breath steamed in great heaving plumes. They were faster now, no more stalking, no more patience. The hunt was over. This was the kill. The forest fell away into a frozen lake. I didn't hesitate. I hurled myself onto the ice, boots skidding. Cracks chased out from my steps in thin black spiderwebs. Wind knifed my face. The trees blurred behind me, and from them the Yetis burst. They hit the lake like collapsing cliffs. The ice screamed, shuddered under their weight. Claws gouged long black scars behind me. One bounded forward, hunched and massive, its shadow swallowing mine. I waited until it lunged, and at the last second I dove aside. Its weight punched through the ice. Water exploded upward in a geyser. The creature bellowed, thrashing as black water swallowed it. The other 2 veered, skidding sideways across the cracking surface. I ran harder, the ice fracturing like glass under a hammer. The far shore loomed closer. Trees. Darkness. Then a roar built behind me, so loud it drowned the wind. I glanced back. The submerged one had torn free of the water, dragging itself up on its claws, ice shattering around it. All 3 were coming again. Nothing could kill them. Nothing could even slow them. The cracks beneath me began to race ahead, slicing the lake open. I jumped the last few feet, hit the bank, and rolled into the trees. I ran until there was no breath left. Until the forest thinned, until the wind hit me like razors again, and then suddenly I was standing on the edge of the world. The trees ended in a sheer cliff. A black void yawned below, filled with churning mist and moonlight. The mountain dropped away in an endless fall into nothing. Behind me, the forest shuddered. Branches cracked. Snow hissed. They were coming through the trees, closer, closer. Their white shapes moved between the trunks like living gaps in the world. There was nowhere left to go. My leg gave out. I fell to my knees. My hands dangled over the void, wind screaming up from the abyss. Tears froze on my cheeks. My mind fractured into jagged pieces. I saw my father's face, my sister's laughter, the kitchen light warm on the night I ran away, the endless silence after they were gone, and above it all the white shapes coming out of the trees, not running, not rushing, walking, because they knew there was only one choice left. I stood. The wind shoved at my back. The cliff edge crumbled beneath my boots. Their eyes gleamed in the dark, bright as the teeth of some endless machine. I smiled. Or maybe it was just my skin tearing on the cold. Then I stepped forward into the void. I remember falling. I remember the air clawing at me, the world turning black and white and black again. I remember the faint sound of laughter or maybe screaming, then nothing. When I woke, there was only snow, endless, featureless, horizonless, no trees, no stars, no wind, no pain, just white. And somewhere far behind me, faint and soft as the scrape of claws across bone, laughter. The snow has stopped falling. At least I think it has. When I open my eyes, the world is muted, like I'm submerged in ash instead of air. The trees are gone, torn down or buried under drifts so high they look like the frozen waves of a dead ocean. My legs don't move when I tell them to. They are stiff, bone-deep cold, as if they've been carved from the same ice that coats the rocks around me. My breath fogs in ragged bursts, rising like smoke from a dying fire. I don't remember crawling this far. The last thing I recall clearly is the screaming. Not theirs, mine. That strangled noise scraping out of me when the largest one stepped from the tree line, silent and slow, like a shadow solidifying into muscle and bone. Its face was barely a face at all, just ridges of blackened flesh and teeth half buried in frost. Its eyes, no, not eyes, not human, not even animal, were voids. And then there was the cave collapsing behind me, the smell of rotting meat gusting from its throat, and the sound of my own body hitting the ground. Now there's only wind, the high, keening whistle of it twisting through the broken peaks. Somewhere below, under the snow, lie the remnants of everyone I knew. Alex's jacket torn to ribbons. Marla's journal, pages scattered like broken wings. The shape that used to be Thomas, frozen with his mouth open in a silent scream. I see their faces in every shadow, their movements stitched into the flicker of the wind-blown drifts. When I blink, I see them watching me from the ridges, from behind the splintered trunks, from the black mouths of shattered caves. But they are not my friends anymore. Not really. They are echoes the mountain is wearing like masks. I think I hear them sometimes. The crunch of footsteps circling just out of sight, always out of sight. The hiss of breath too warm to be wind. I tell myself it's memory. I tell myself my mind is breaking apart like the ice beneath me. Because if I admit they're still there, if I accept that those things are still hunting, I'll start screaming again, and I don't think I'll ever stop. I know they let me go. That's what gnaws at me, worse than the cold or the hunger or the smell of my own skin turning gray. They could have ended me a dozen times, ripped me open like they did the others, but they didn't. They stalked me for days, circling, watching. And when I finally stumbled out into this white nothingness, they stayed behind. Why? I keep seeing their prints in the snow, half filled by new drifts leading nowhere. Sometimes I follow them until they vanish. Sometimes they appear behind me, though I know I never heard anything approach. Once, I woke up and found one print beside my head, pressed so deep into the ice that the meltwater ran red. Maybe this is what they do. Maybe they don't kill all of us. Maybe they leave one behind to carry the story, to poison the world beyond the mountains with whispers and dread. Maybe they know no one will believe me. That I'll sound like a madman, raving about black-furred giants in the fog, about the bones that sang when the wind passed through them. Maybe they know that no one will come looking, or maybe they're still waiting, watching me crawl toward the edge of this place, broken and starved and hollow-eyed, just to see if I make it. Just to see if I dare bring the memory of them back down the mountain. The horizon is bleeding pale light now, dawn or something like it. My fingers are stiff claws. My skin is cracked where the cold has bitten through. Every step leaves blood behind, bright as berries against the white. I keep thinking of the first time I saw their tracks, how I stood there smiling faintly, charmed by their size, as if I'd stumbled onto a fairy tale. As if wonder and horror weren't just different masks worn by the same thing. If I make it out, if anyone ever finds me, I know they won't believe what I tell them. They'll say the mountain did this to me. The isolation, the hunger, the cold. They'll say I watched my friends die in an avalanche and made monsters to explain it. They'll pat my hand and promise I'm safe now. But the mountain is still behind me, and it remembers. Sometimes I think I hear something moving inside it, something shifting miles beneath the ice, ancient and slow, older than language or thought. The wind carries a low vibration now, like a heartbeat buried under stone. I wonder if the world beneath the world has always been alive, waiting for us to wander in too far, waiting to peel us open and wear our memories like skins. I can't tell if I'm still walking or if I've been lying here the whole time. The snow tastes like ash. The air tastes like iron. The sky is thinning into a gray veil, and through it I see shapes moving, enormous and quiet, gliding across the ridgelines as if the mountains themselves are standing up and walking away. They are going back into the fog. Or they are coming closer. The cold has crawled inside my bones now. I think if I close my eyes, I won't open them again. Maybe that's what they want. Maybe that's how they finish the hunt, not with teeth or claws, but with silence. Maybe they're waiting for me to fall asleep so they can step out of the white and kneel beside me and press their faces to mine and see what's left. If anyone finds this, if anyone finds me, no. No one will. The wind is rising again. The snow is starting to fall. And far behind me, somewhere deep in the wreckage of the peaks, something is still screaming.